Do the Detroit Red Wings still believe in the Yzer plan as it heads into year 6? And two teams that may not be done making moves this offseason. What's up with the Winnipeg Jets and the Anaheim Ducks? We have all that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Red Wings, Brian Fisher. And Brian, not a dull offseason by any stretch of the imagination in the Motor City. Let's talk about some of the biggest moves the Red Wings made this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, as you put it in the cold open, they saw a lot of goals leave. Daniel Sprong, who most recently signed with the Vancouver Canucks. Shane Gostisbehere, who had 57 points, walked away as well. David Perron went to the Enemy in Ottawa, signed a 2-year deal, which I'm really curious how that's going to work out in the locker room because David Perron, I don't know if you remember this, cross-checked a player in the side of the head and got a 6-game suspension trying to defend Dylan Larkin, who was knocked out cold in a game against the Ottawa Senators. So I'm curious how that's going to work out. But, you know, they saw a lot of goals walk out the door, traded away with Jake Wallman and Robbie Fabry. And so there's a little bit of apprehension with the Detroit Red Wings this offseason because Yzerman went out and replaced those goals with guys who, Vladimir Tarasenko and Patrick Kane notwithstanding, obviously, are better defensively than the guys that left. Daniel Sprong put up over half point per game. Putrid defensively. Robbie Fabry, really, he was part of this team's rebuild since the worst days of this rebuild, but he was making $4 million and was pushed on the depth chart, but was still good for about 20 goals a season. Traded away to Anaheim. Jake Wallman just set a career high in points. Sent out to Anaheim. I think Wallman was sent to San Jose and Robbie Fabry was sent to Anaheim. Getting my California teams mixed up there. But like a lot of these guys provided a lot of offense, but in return, he brought in a Tyler Mott on the bottom 6 who's really, really well known for having a hard-nosed play style, really good on the penalty kill as well. Erik Gustafsson helps replace a little bit of Shane Gostisbehere's offense. Not all of it, but he's also a defenseman that you don't need to shelter nearly as much as Shane Gostisbehere. And that was kind of the game plan. And if you listen to Steve Yzerman, it makes perfect sense the guys he brought in to this roster this year, because last year at the end of season availability, he said this team needs to get better defensively. A lot of the guys he brought in fit that description. Erik Gustafsson is going to be a power play guy that you don't have to shelter nearly as much as I previously stated. You got Tyler Mott, obviously, but it's time for this team to make room for youth. Jonathan Berggren was no longer waiver exempt, so he's going to make the team or be on a different NHL squad if they decide to waive him because he's not going to clear. Same with defenseman Albert Johansson, no longer waiver exempt. So you either got to play him or he's going to be on a different NHL team. So you're getting a little bit of, and that doesn't even mention Simon Edvinsson, who played 16 games at the end of last season and is going to slot right into a top 4 role with the Detroit Red Wings. So when there's a lot of apprehension with the Detroit Red Wings offseason free agency, I always come back with, well, we've also been asking for a youth movement, and you can't go out there and sign a bunch of veterans but also expect your youth to make the team. So it was a much more conservative offseason buy for Steve Yzerman's standards, especially once he talked about this in his free agency availability. He saw the term being handed out to a lot of, as he put it, role players, your Matt Roys, your Stevensons, your Montours, getting 7-year deals. He ain't about that life. Steve Yzerman does not like giving long-term deals. The longest contract he's given out is 5 years, and that was to Andrew Comp, and I believe Comfer last year as well. So a lot of the moves make sense if you listen to Steve Yzerman talk. He wanted the team to get better defensively, and he did that, while also maintaining a pretty offensive-minded top six and bringing back Patrick Kane for his first full season since the surgery. And Patrick Kane was a point per game with the Detroit Red Wings last year in the limited games he did play. If he can be that much or better with a full offseason of actual NHL training, you're going to replace some of those goals. Jonathan Berggren's going to replace your Daniel Sprong as a bottom six power play merchant. Like, that's the type of role he's going to play, as a bottom six scorer. Vladimir Tarasenko is a younger player than David Perron, who's going to score probably more than an aging David Perron did his final year at the Detroit Red Wings. So there is a lot of kind of exchanging this for that, and that's where it comes down to, where everything that the Red Wings did this year, did it make them better? Points-wise, probably laterally as good. Probably comparable to last year's team. I think they'll be better defensively while they lost a little bit of goals, and I think that'll even out. But I don't think that fixes the big question that Red Wings fans have, is, will this team make the playoffs? I'm a little bit skeptical still. Being laterally as good is not good enough to get them in the playoffs when you already missed the season prior.
So looking at this roster now, and you mentioned the team is getting younger, they're emphasizing defense a little bit more. What is your biggest concern when you look at this team the way it's presently constructed?
Biggest concern is still right now the structure of the defense. We saw a little bit of a shakeup on the offense, right, on how they're going to approach the bottom six. Less run and gun, as some of those wingers like to do on the bottom six, and more defensively responsible, which this team needed. But I mean, you're still looking at a top four, which has Moritz Seider, who's still contract extension pending, but who's your number one D-man. He's excellent. We all love Moritz Seider with the Detroit Red Wings. But then his partner is projected to be Ben Chiarot, who, is fine, but is he a top pair defenseman? Probably not. Second pair, you got Simon Edvinsson, who we all believe is going to be at his peak a top pair defenseman, playing his first full season in the NHL. He'll be fine there. But opposite him, you have Jeff Petrie, who in his prime, of course, was suited for the role, but not so much anymore. So your top two pairs on either side has a question mark to be like, and you're paying those question marks combined more than $6-7 million. So the top four defensive pairings still leave a little bit left to be desired. And we did see Ben Chiarot have a better second season with the Detroit Red Wings. And at the end of the year, he was paired back up with Moritz Seider, and that pair looked better than the Wollman-Seider pair did all season long. So there's a little bit of hope to be had that Chiarot and Seider will be better than when they were paired together in their first season with the Detroit Red Wings. But that second pair is still just super concerning, because Jeff Petrie, and I'm a Jeff Petrie defender because of the fact that, I recognize that a lot of the reason why he looked so poor was more to do with how he was utilized given his age. He just shouldn't have been put in those situations. He should be a bottom pair defenseman with the Detroit Red Wings at this point in his career, and he was forced to be a second pair. And that still concerns me. I'm also concerned about how the roster is a little bit constructed, because right now you'll have 8D and 3 goalies, because you're going to have Lyon, Cam Talbot, who's an upgrade, and Ville Husso. So with that, the math works out. You have 8D, 3 goalies, 12 forwards. You don't carry a 13th, which isn't abnormal for Derek Lalonde. He likes to run 11 and 7, but it doesn't leave you any room for your real top prospects outside of Simon Edvinsson to really get a crack at the roster. Like, where's your Carter Mazier, your Danielson, your Casper? You're getting some youth on the team, but the ones that the fans really want really are going to have to prove that they need to push somebody out to get that spot, which I guess is right, but the math is weird on the roster construction. 8D and 3 goalies is odd.
It is certainly a little unusual. Is there a little bit of impatience growing right now with Steve Yzerman and the fact that this team has missed the playoffs as long as it has?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, even I try to look at the rational side of things, and I led this off by saying, I understand the decisions that Yzerman made this offseason, and I think it's the right decision to make based on the giant holes this team had last year. But at the same time, I don't know. None of the moves he made, I believe, made this team more than marginally better at best. And so I'm a little bit angsty too, because I'm ready for the team to make the playoffs. I'm a Red Wings fan first. I've been following this team since, 05, 06, and I'm ready for this team to get back to where they were. And last year they were so close. So to see them go into the offseason and go, okay, we're going to make these just marginal upgrades on a few positions, but not really make a big splash, I get it. I really, really do. But I also just understand the approach here. Like at some point, the youth had to make the team. And for the youth to make the team, that means you had to not sign certain veterans. That's how you keep spots open for guys like Johansson, Berggren, and Edvinsson. Like that's how it works. And when you bring in young guys on the team, and technically Berggren, this would be his sophomore season. He's already had his rookie year with the Detroit Red Wings, but we still kind of consider him youth. This is what happens. Is sometimes when you bring a lot of youth in, you might expect a little bit of a step back in terms of points before you can take 2 steps forward. So while I completely get the apprehension, and I'm also kind of, my patience is beginning to thin because this will be year 6 of Yzerman's rebuild. At the same time, I understand the direction he took the team this offseason because I believe it can lead to a leap forward, but just how soon? And I'm ready for it to be soon.
Totally understandable. Brian, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Well, you can find the podcast on, of course, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you're listening to this podcast, really. You can find our social media page at @LO_Red Wings on Twitter. We're also on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me at Brian Fisher, LORW, and my co-host Scotty Bentley is at Bentley Scotty on Twitter as well. So just check us out there.
All right, Brian, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Of course. Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. And prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and you get their lowest price guarantee. So Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. My favorite feature on the Game Time app is the view from your seat. You go on the app and you could see a panoramic view of what you'll see from the seat you're about to buy before you make the purchase. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, Harrison Lee. And Harrison, it's been an interesting offseason so far in Winnipeg and maybe some unfinished business as well. But let's start with the coaching change. How does the new coaching situation affect the way this team is going to play on a game in, game out basis?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because, quite honestly, it's relatively unknown. Arniel is a very limited sample size to work with. I think, Scott has talked a lot recently about some of the lessons that he learned in Columbus. I think at one point he even got locked out of the room by his own players. So, I mean, he went through some really difficult stuff before coming to Winnipeg. And when he was interim coach for a few short stretches, that's when he had one of the best lines in the league. And, there were just some signs that I think he wanted to be a little bit more offensively ambitious. But this year, it seems like his big push is to really integrate the youth. That's been, from the start of his hiring, a big point. I think he's specifically talked about Cole Perfetti and a handful of other players. And, obviously for the Jets, they don't really sign or make a lot of big trades. So internal development, I think, is a nice thing to go back to. He did also talk about wanting to push like an analytics summit, which is something the Jets have never really done before. So I find all of that interesting. If he wants to be the guy who kind of takes the next step with this franchise and modernizes the team a bit more, I think that's great. I think, Paul Maurice did that when he first joined because honestly, there were stories of like players getting boxed like sandwich lunches and stuff from catering back in the early days of the Jets. And Paul Maurice was like, no, we can't really be doing that. So I don't think we're going to see stuff that drastic, but now it's kind of time for the franchise to take the next evolution, so to speak.
As far as the on-ice style, do you expect any changes, or do you think it'll be more or less status quo?
Given what he's talked about, I think he wants more speed and skill. I think Bones played a really defensive system, which for the Jets actually worked out pretty well because our team was constructed to be big and heavier. This team, I'm hoping, is a little more mobile, a little more fleet of foot, and hopefully, there's more of a meritocracy where you're not just having certain role players get prescribed ice times based on what the coaching staff wants. I think you got to have guys really fighting for it and earning their spots. And not that they don't on a routine basis, but you saw some players like Perfetti get benched under Bones when it's like, you probably should be playing him. He's like one of your top 6 best skaters. So, let's not do that. And I think this year, Arniel's probably going to preach that. I think he'll want some level of offensive aggression. I'm hoping that there's more creativity both on the power play and at 5v5. This team doesn't create a load of offense. So if the Jets can find a way to squeak out just even a bit more, I think that would be a tremendous help.
Out of all the offseason moves the team has made, which one do you like the best, and which one are you questioning the most?
Given the limited set, I think for me, Ville Heinola getting signed for a couple years is probably a good sign. I think it's probably one of the most positive things. Obviously, the DeMello extension is a big deal, but I think in terms of what I see as a sign for Winnipeg's current and future defensive group, Heinola signing with at least a little bit of term was an interesting sort of show me sort of contract, which makes me think that they do figure him to be a big part of the team this year and hopefully beyond. And for him, taking a relatively cheap deal on a team that's promising you a spot, a lot of people were like, why would he do that? And it's like, well, he doesn't have a lot of value outside of the Jets, not right now. And I think there would be teams that would be willing to take a waiver claim on him, but probably not ones that want to give him guaranteed salary. And him just coming off an ankle injury that was pretty serious, I could see, this being a nice way for him to try and work his way up through the NHL. So I like that one a lot. I guess if I had to critique one particular move, the Schmidt buyout for me is a little bit of a mixed bag. One of our defenders had to be bought out, but I think they maybe chose the wrong one. Schmidt still has some on-ice value. I mean, he's still okay as like a third pairing guy. Obviously Neil Pionk for me has had a really rough run of past couple of seasons. He's been playing more like his New York Rangers days, which unfortunately was a little bit rough around the edges, if I'm being generous. And, I mean, it is what it is. You're not really gaining much by jettisoning either player other than, you get some cap space to work with, which is nice. And maybe you can improve some on-ice performance. But I feel like Schmidt's been the better of the two. But, I mean, you're kind of trying to pick between 2 7th D at this point. So how much does it really impact? It's going to depend on what Pionk's role is this year.
Yeah. Now, you talked about the team wanting a little more speed and a little more skill, and yet one of their top skill players, there's a lot of trade rumors, and one of their top prospects, a lot of trade rumors. Why don't you fill us in on the latest and how you possibly see these things resolving themselves?
The Ehlers one is a tough one to read for me. I still think he's getting traded at some point. The Jets are shopping him, which they seem to do a lot in the off seasons. And I just feel like with his injury history and age, they're doing the calculus and thinking, well, maybe we'll swap him for an RFA of some sort, right? An out of favor player who's asking for a big contract. And I think Nietzsche's probably checks off a lot of those boxes. Nietzsche has some red flags in his underlying numbers that are, making you wonder a little bit. He's scoring at a similar primary scoring rate to Zemgus Girgensons, which if you're asking for $8 million, that's not great. Personally, I mean, it is what it is. He's a nice finisher, so I think he'd be a fine player for the Jets. Probably the best return you can expect. The Jets maybe even have to add something to it. But I mean, they also did just clear out some cap space in Carolina's then, so maybe they want to re-sign him. Wherever Ehlers goes, he'll have some sort of a contract extension in place. It's going to be a bittersweet farewell, and he is our best transition player and one of our best creators, so it sucks. I could see it being played until the trade deadline. That is one thing the Jets may do if they're not really getting offers they like. And I mean, I wouldn't mind 40 more games of Nikolaj Ehlers, get to have one last ride. But the more I've thought about it, the more I've sort of kind of come around to the idea of letting him go. I think his best years probably were a bit wasted, but there's still a chance for him to go somewhere and maybe chase a championship. Wish it was with the Jets, but it is what it is. McGroarty, Lord even knows. That whole thing has just been a very bizarre saga. I've never really heard of a prospect wanting a roster spot for a playoff run and then not getting it and suddenly just freezing out communications. I've heard guys like complain and moan, but never seen somebody just basically shut down discussions for the most part. It does seem like they've been in contact a little more frequently recently, and I think maybe the agent overplayed his hand a bit. But the other thing for the Jets is there's kind of a timetable here where they need to get it before next summer, because at that point he can just go back to Michigan and become a free agent. And the Jets definitely don't want to have that happen. And I think a lot of teams would probably prefer to have a chance to directly negotiate now rather than fighting each other for, that opening contract offer. So, I mean, I don't know what his return is going to be like. I keep seeing like lots of Canadians fans and other fans of teams are like, he's never played an NHL game. Here, just take all the spare parts and crap. And I'm like, you're telling me those guys who also haven't played an NHL game are worth the same thing of a prospect who's about to knock on an NHL spot. So like, let's stop the double standard stuff. But by the same token, this drama being dragged out to the way it is not great. So I'm hoping, I think the funniest outcome is if he actually just shows up to camp and plays. That would be a very interesting conversation in the locker room, I'm sure. But I suspect at some point we'll see a deal here. And maybe it's even part of this Ehlers deal. You could do a huge blockbuster trade. It'd be very interesting if they go that route. I do have some questions on the return, but at this point, just make sure that you get a decent return. That's all I'm asking for. And when Winnipeg has had its back up against the wall, they've usually done pretty well. But this, we'll have to just wait and see.
All right. Well, Harrison, I know you'll cover it every step of the way. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
We are at Locked On Winnipeg Jets and on X/Twitter. I still call it Twitter. It is at LO_Winnipeg Jets. And if you want to hear me rant about the Jets on text form, that's HL Living Loco on X and Twitter.
All right. Harrison, thanks so much.
Thanks again.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Ducks, Jason J.D. Hernandez. And been an interesting offseason so far for the Ducks. Kind of curious in a lot of ways. Wanted to start off talking about all the Trevor Zegras rumors that are out there. We've been hearing them for quite a long time. What's the latest, and is Zegras going to remain an Anaheim Duck in the near future?
That's pretty much most of what they are. They are mostly just rumors at this point. And a lot of the rumors are kind of unfounded. Even some of the prospected trades that are possible are so far out that the Ducks wouldn't even consider that. Now, would Pat Verbeek listen to offers? Sure, he could listen to offers all day. The only way that Trevor Zegras would even possibly be traded is if it was the exact right move, or if the other team kind of overpaid, which most teams are not going to do. And also that contract is a pretty heady contract as well. I mean, we're talking about $5.75 million. And yeah, there's a bit of, oh, some players don't like, I don't believe all that. And of course, there's even some fans saying like, oh, we don't want Zegras. Then they turn around and say, but we want him on the team. Like, pick a lane, guys. But he's going to stay a Duck for at least this season. He's for sure going to stay a Duck. You do not give up one of your most dynamic scorers, one of your most dynamic wingers. I think we kind of forgot. Trevor Zegras led the team in points just 2 seasons ago, his last fully healthy season. And last season, part of the reason for some of the chatter was because he was injured most of last season. And in fact, when he came back, I mean, there was some rumblings that he still was not 100% even when he came back. So the fact that we never really got a fully healthy Trevor Zegras for pretty much the entirety of the season, that speaks volumes. Now, part of that was he did sign a bit late, missed a lot of training camp. But when you have a fully healthy Trevor Zegras, he can be one of the best weapons on any team. And the Ducks do not want to give that up right now, especially when they're starting to go on the upside of a rebuild.
So why these rumors? Where are they coming from? Is there some discontent about him in the locker room, or where is this coming from?
It's just coming from chatter. Just like some of it's coming from fan chatter that are really unfounded. And some of this is just coming from teams or team sites where they would love to have someone like this, or the reason for those rumors the previous year is because Zegras hadn't been signed yet. I think that's where it really started. It started in 2022-23 when Zegras did not get an extension yet, where he didn't get that big 7x7 or 8x8. He didn't have that yet. So that's really where it began. And then they continued. So yeah, I just do not see that trade happening anytime soon if it happens.
So, as we said in the opening, the Ducks have made a lot of moves, but they've lost more players than they've brought in. Your thoughts on some of the guys they lost and how this all fits in with the rebuild that's been going on in Anaheim?
It really begins with a trade deadline, doesn't it? Because the Ducks lost a couple of big pieces in the trade deadline. First off, when you lose, Lyubushkin is now gone, but that's more of addition by subtraction because Lyubushkin, I'm just going to keep it honest here. I'm only going to quote what certain Toronto media has said, where they've said, Lyubushkin is one of the worst defensemen in the entire National Hockey League. So it's addition by subtraction. I'm not saying it. I'm just quoting what others have said.
Okay.
That's where I'm going with that. But I think one of the big losses was the Adam Henrique trade. It was the Henrique and Sam Carrick trade where they both went to the Edmonton Oilers. That was kind of a big loss for the Ducks. Sam Carrick, one of the best PK people for the Ducks, and Adam Henrique both went for a cup in Edmonton. Both came up 1 goal short. Let's see, what else was there? Jacob Perreault, that's another big loss. That one, I thought I was a little bit sad about that one because Perreault was regarded as being one of those guys in the draft and just didn't work out. Losing Gage Alexander to the Red Wings, that one kind of stunk a little bit. Aside from that, just in general, there was a lot of guys that I thought could have come back and didn't, and I just mentioned a couple of them. Silfverberg, they lost to retirement. Actually, Silfverberg retired from the National Hockey League. He's going back to his hometown of Gävle. It's pronounced Gävle, spelled Gavle, home of the Gävle goat, by the way. Look it up. But he's gone. Max Jones, he departed to Boston. So another loss there as well. So just when you look at all the players that they've lost, yeah, it kind of stinks a little bit. But they got some pieces. They got Brian Dumoulin from the Seattle Kraken. So not a bad deal there. But just in general, I don't see where the Ducks go from here, because looking at their prospective roster for next season, I mean, they've got Cutter Gauthier that's going to come in. They got Beckett Seneca. They got Jansen Harkins coming in, but still a bit to be desired, I would say, because the Ducks free agency, they did not pick up anyone on day one.
Right.
They were the only team that did not make a signing on day one of free agency. So that alone hurt the Ducks quite a bit. So I would say the off-season moves, I wouldn't grade it too highly for the Ducks. Their best off-season moves came in the draft. And they had a good draft this year.
They did. They certainly did. But
yeah.
So how does this fit in with the rebuilding program here? I mean, are we basically saying this is going to be another year where there are going to be a lottery team contending for that first overall pick?
I talked about the draft because I saw your third bullet point right there. Or, sorry, your other bullet point right there. How much progress has been made? This prospect pool is deep. I mean, really, really deep. And a lot of those guys are just graduating right now and just barely tapping into their full potential. This team is young. Their defensive core are going to consist of guys like Tristan Luneau, like Pavel Mintyukov, who I was very impressed with. Minty, by the way. Jackson Lacombe just got re-signed. Olin Zellweger. Zellweger, I think, is going to be a very good defenseman down the line. Mintyukov, I think people didn't expect him to be as good as he did right away.
Right.
I know this because I got text messages from friends that didn't expect a whole lot from Minty. And he's proven them wrong. And then you have your stalwarts on defense in Cam Fowler, who has seen better days. And Radko Gudas has turned out to be a pretty solid signing for the Ducks. I've enjoyed watching Gudas on the Ducks. He had a good World Championships, rather.
Right.
This past year with Czechia, who won gold, by the way, along with Lukáš Dostal, which goes into your third bullet point. The progress made, I think, is going to rely on what the Ducks decide to do on goaltending. Are they going to stick with John Gibson for one more year? Are they going to make a transition with Lukáš Dostal in net? So I think there's a bit to be seen there. But all the young players, there's a lot of them. Leo Carlson, the first-round pick last season. Beckett Seneca, the number 3 pick this season. I know it's still a shock to some that the Ducks went to Beckett Seneca. Stian Solberg is going to be very good in about a year's time. And one player that I do want to talk about, Cutter Gauthier, who plays with a ton of confidence. You want to talk about a guy that walks into a room and you could already tell he's like, yeah, we're ready to go. And some people perceive that as arrogance. I perceive that as confidence. I perceive that as he knows he is going to be one of the best players on the ice. And he's going to prove a lot of haters wrong. I know Philly fans still hate him. I know of at least a couple Philly fans that are colleagues of ours that are going to be ready to have some choice words for Cutter Gauthier when he visits Philly this season. I know. But this year, I think, is still going to be a bit of a rebuild. Is it going to be a lottery season this year? Likely, yes. Is it going to be a bottom 3? No. This team made some strides last season, and now they are focusing more on speed. They're focusing more on transition play. Looking at the draft, they focused on more two-way players and more players that are going to be stoppers. And they're going to be more positionally aware on defense. And especially with Greg Cronin at the helm. And this goes into one more point I want to make. The progress that they're making as far as behind the scenes. Coaching, that's going to look better. The PK is going to look significantly better. The power play is going to look better. Special teams in general is going to look a lot better. And we're going to see the process and the progress this coming season. So I could see them possibly contending into March, maybe April. Could they make the playoffs? I mean, I still don't see it yet, but I could see them making progress. maybe in the middle third of teams. So we will start to see the rebuilding process start to trend upward. So that's where I have as far as Ducks progress.
All right, should be very interesting, and I know you'll keep an eye on things all year long. Jason, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
The podcast, as always, is on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast. We are ad-free on Amazon, also on Sirius XM, which I just discovered the other day. And as far as me on the socials, you can find me on the socials. My personal Twitter X is at StimpyJD. The show's Twitter X is at LO_Ducks. And feel free to drop me a line, lockedonanaheimducks@gmail.com. And Gil, thanks for having me come on once again, and really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Jason. Thanks so much. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. I want to thank my guests today, Brian Fisher of Locked On Red Wings, Harrison Lee of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, and Jason J.D. Hernandez of Locked On Anaheim Ducks for joining me today. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. Everydayers, don't forget, we are here every day, Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the National Hockey League. So make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks so much for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.